The fluorescent lights above my Scottsdale showroom hummed softly, the kind of quiet hum that makes you think the day is calm, orderly, predictable. I was squinting at two upholstery swatches, one burgundy, one navy, debating which would best suit the new display sofa, when my phone rang. The vibration against the polished wood of my desk made me start slightly, sending a few fabric samples tumbling to the floor. I sighed, muttering under my breath, and picked them up, arranging them carefully before reaching for the phone. "Hello?" I said, keeping my tone calm, professional. "Dad, Dad, are you sitting down?" Kevin's voice was frantic, rushed, a tangle of excitement and urgency. My stomach did a small, uncomfortable flip. Kevin never called during work hours unless something had happened. My mind immediately began running through possibilities. Accident, health crisis, job troubles. "What's wrong, Kevin?" I asked, already straightening in my chair, trying to gauge the tension in his voice. There was a brief pause, then his words came tumbling out in a breathless rush, one over the other. "Everything's fine. Actually, perfect. Jessica's pregnant. We're getting married. 2 weeks from Saturday." I know it's fast, but when you know, right? I felt the fabric samples slip from my fingers again. My son, my 30-year-old son, who had stumbled through 3 failed engagements in his 20s and had spent the last 5 years avoiding commitment entirely, was now announcing a pregnancy and a wedding within 2 weeks. "Kevin, that's wonderful. I'm happy for you, Moss," I said, searching for words that felt genuine and not overrun by disbelief. "I'd love to meet her properly tonight. Can we come over for dinner?" "I was hoping you'd say yes. 7 o'clock?" "Absolutely," I replied, glancing at my watch. It was 3:15. Plenty of time to prepare something nice. After hanging up, I leaned back in my leather chair and stared at the ceiling tiles. I couldn't help but think about how quickly life seemed to accelerate around me. Kevin hadn't mentioned Jessica before last month. Now they were married in all but ceremony, and she was expecting a child. The timeline felt compressed, rushed, almost like a blur. But perhaps that was just my old-fashioned sensibility talking. My late wife, Anne, and I had dated for 3 years before getting married. Different generation, different rules, I told myself. I wanted this to work for him. I wanted him to find happiness, and I wanted to honor that desire. The market on Camelback had decent stakes, and I allowed myself a brief mental break to think about dinner. I would prepare something thoughtful, but simple, sensible, not ostentatious, something that would show care without showing off wealth. I selected 2 ribeyes and a New York strip from my private butcher, grabbed fresh asparagus and baby potatoes, and chose a Napa Cabernet that wasn't too expensive but respectable enough to honor the occasion. At home, I set the dining room table with Anne's china, the ivory plates edged with delicate gold rims she had inherited from her grandmother. I paused for a moment, tracing the patterns with my fingers. Tradition mattered. If Kevin was beginning a family, these small gestures deserved acknowledgement. The house smelled faintly of the evening sun streaming through the windows, warming the living room, giving the art on the walls and the polished wood floors a subtle glow. I glanced at the clock again. 7 o'clock would be here soon, and with it, the storm I already sensed in the air. When the doorbell rang precisely at 7, I straightened my tie, smoothing down my blazer, and opened the door to find Kevin practically vibrating with the nervous energy I remembered from his childhood piano recitals. His smile was bright, but his eyes held a tension that mirrored my own. And then there was Jessica. She stepped in with a poise that made the room feel smaller, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her designer dress sculpting her frame perfectly. Her heels clicked against the tile with a rhythm that demanded attention. She extended a hand, firm, almost challenging, and offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Dad, this is Jessica," Kevin said, a slight quiver in his voice betraying his nerves. "Charles," she said, voice smooth, controlled. "Kevin talks about you constantly." Her eyes swept past me, taking in the furniture, the artwork, the china cabinet, the grandfather clock. "What a lovely home," she said, stepping inside. "Thank you. Please come in. Dinner's almost ready," I replied, trying to keep my tone light, welcoming. Kevin hovered at her side like a satellite, as if gauging her reactions. making sure she approved. Jessica's attention immediately latched onto the china cabinet, her fingers brushing lightly over the carved wood. Interesting pieces. Are these antiques? Her phone was already in hand, ready to snap pictures. Do you mind if I take a few photos? I love vintage design. Before I could answer, she was taking pictures of everything. The cabinet, the grandfather clock, the credenza. Kevin jumped in, clearly proud. Jess is really into interior design, he said, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. She's got amazing taste. I nodded, heading to the kitchen to prepare the last touches of dinner. But a warning bell rang in my mind. Her tone when she said antiques wasn't admiration. It was appraisal, evaluation, measurement, calculation. Dinner itself began pleasantly enough. Kevin tried to engage in conversation, updating me on his work in commercial real estate, but Jessica dominated the discussion. 4 stores, Kevin mentioned. That generates significant revenue. Jessica's eyes flicked to me, sharp and assessing. And what's the annual take for something like that? It varies, I replied lightly, carefully. The economy affects furniture sales more than people realize. But you must do well, she pressed, with a smile that felt more pointed than friendly. This neighborhood, this house, the business, you've built something substantial. Kevin shifted in his seat, mumbling praise about how hard I'd worked, while Jessica sipped her wine, her gaze unwavering. We drove through Paradise Valley yesterday, she continued. Those estates are breathtaking. That's where I picture raising a family. Good schools, safe neighborhoods. Important for children, don't you think? The implication hung in the air like smoke. Kevin looked down at his plate, quietly carving his meat into smaller, meticulous pieces. I measured my words carefully. Paradise Valley is expensive, I said evenly. Of course, she replied sweetly, placing her hand over Kevin's. But you can't put a price on a grandchild's future. Kevin finally spoke, though cautiously. We're still figuring out our housing situation. My current rental is difficult. The landlord refuses to make basic repairs. We need proper space for the baby. Jessica smiled, widening her eyes in the practiced way of someone who knows exactly how to push a point. Kevin tells me you're very generous with family. That's rare these days. I took a long sip of water, buying time, letting my instincts process. 40 years in business had taught me to recognize subtle manipulation, and every cell in my body was firing warnings. This wasn't casual conversation. She was testing responses, calculating possibilities. The rest of the meal passed in a similar rhythm. Compliments, questions, appraisals. Kevin occasionally tried to redirect, but Jessica's focus remained steady, surgical, strategic. Finally, at 10:30, they rose to leave. Jessica hugged me at the door, perfume enveloping me. She leaned close, whispering, "Thank you for being so understanding. Kevin talks about your generosity all the time. We're lucky to have you." Kevin's hug was brief, distracted, and already she was glancing at her phone as they walked down the driveway. I stood there, in the dim light of the entryway, watching their taillights disappear down the street, her head already bent over her screen, absorbed. Inside, I cleared the table slowly, washing Anne's china by hand, feeling the weight of what had just occurred. There was a lesson here, a test I hadn't agreed to, but I understood it now. Patience, observation, and quiet discernment were my allies. I could feel the gears turning in my mind, a plan forming for what would come next. Kevin's happiness mattered, but so did protecting him from those who would take advantage. And as I rinsed the delicate gold-rimmed plates, I silently vowed I would respond, and my response would be precise. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the tall windows of my office, painting golden streaks across the polished floor. I sat behind my desk, the burgundy and navy fabric swatches still lying on the wood from yesterday, though I barely noticed them. My mind wasn't on color palettes or showroom layouts. It was on Jessica. On the way she had looked at my home, the way she had cataloged the furniture, the antiques, the paintings, as though taking an inventory of value. Kevin's engagement in impending fatherhood had created a whirlwind of emotions, but it wasn't worry that held me awake that night. It was awareness, a quiet, simmering caution. I knew enough about human behavior to recognize someone who was strategic, someone who measured everything around them. And Jessica was calculating, her charm a tool rather than a gesture of genuine warmth. By noon, Kevin called. His voice was lighter than yesterday, tinged with excitement rather than urgency. Dad, Jessica and I were talking and we were wondering if you could help us look at a few properties this weekend. We want something safe for the baby. Nothing extravagant, just comfortable. I nodded, leaning back in my chair. Of course, Kevin. We'll see what's suitable. But as I hung up, a nagging feeling lingered. Nothing extravagant, just comfortable. I knew well enough to read between the lines. Comfortable in Paradise Valley wasn't just comfortable. It was expensive, sprawling estates, pristine lawns, and schools with more prestige than sense. The day passed in a blur. I reviewed invoices, called a couple of suppliers, and tried to focus on work. But the earlier dinner replayed in my mind like a carefully edited film. Jessica's questions had been pointed, precise, and often delivered under the guise of casual curiosity. How much was each piece of furniture worth? How profitable were Kevin's stores? Where could they live that would ensure a good life for the child? Every word, every gesture seemed intended to gauge both the depth of my wealth and my willingness to share it. By evening, I decided it was time to continue the subtle test, to see how Jessica operated when not seated at the dining table, where she had already gathered initial data. Kevin had invited me to join them for a casual visit to a property they were considering. A modest home, at least by Paradise Valley standards. When I arrived, Jessica greeted me with a bright, practiced smile. She was dressed in a smart coat and heels, hair immaculate as ever. Kevin was already by her side, holding the door for me as if ushering me into a carefully constructed scene. Charles, she said, her voice warm, melodic, but with a precision that suggested every word had been measured. I'm so glad you came. I smiled politely, nodding. Thank you for inviting me. It's important to know where the family will be living. As we drove through tree-lined streets and manicured lawns, Jessica leaned forward, her phone resting on the dashboard, occasionally typing notes, occasionally snapping pictures. This area is ideal, she said, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. Good schools, safe neighborhoods, perfect for a child. Yes, I agreed carefully. Safety is important, but these homes aren't inexpensive. Oh, I know, she said lightly, flipping her hair back, as if brushing aside the concern. We're just exploring options, seeing what might work. I watched her closely. Exploring options was one thing. Appraising my finances was another. Her eyes flicked toward me in a quick, subtle glance, as if she were calculating my reaction to the statement about cost. At the property, we stepped inside. It was a beautiful home, freshly painted, immaculately staged. Jessica moved like a predator among her prey, walking slowly from room to room, touching counters lightly, running her fingers along the edge of cabinets, lifting blinds to see how much natural light the bedrooms received. Every gesture, every glance was measured. She was appraising the space for practicality and status, noting what could be improved, what would appeal to her sense of control. Kevin trailed behind, nervously adjusting his jacket, muttering small observations about square footage and neighborhood proximity. I stayed silent, observing Jessica, my suspicions confirmed. She was thinking in terms of investment, positioning, leverage. Her interest wasn't casual, it was strategic. When we stepped out onto the patio overlooking a small landscaped yard, Jessica turned toward me. Charles, you've built a wonderful life for yourself. Kevin's very fortunate. I can see where he gets his drive. Her tone was complimentary, but again, I noticed the subtle undertone. She wasn't praising, she was acknowledging potential benefit, evaluating my generosity and influence. During the drive back, she asked Kevin about his current rental. Kevin hesitated. It's fine, functional. The landlord isn't very responsive, though. Repairs take time. Jessica tilted her head. That's not ideal with a baby coming. Something more permanent is important. Wouldn't you agree, Charles? I nodded, choosing my words carefully. Of course, stability is important, but it comes with responsibility and investment. A home isn't just bricks and mortar. It's upkeep, taxes, and careful planning. Her smile didn't falter. I understand. We just want a safe place for our child. I'm sure you know the right balance. Back at home, I reflected on the day. Jessica was polite, charming, articulate, but every sentence, every compliment, every glance had been calculated to gather information. She was testing my generosity, measuring my willingness to provide, probing for vulnerabilities. Kevin seemed almost oblivious to the implications, caught in his excitement while I could see the gears turning in Jessica's mind. That evening, Kevin went out with friends, leaving Jessica and me alone to talk. I invited her to sit in the living room offering tea. She accepted gracefully, crossing her legs, her posture perfect. "You have a beautiful home, Jessica," I said, carefully neutral. "It's clear you appreciate craftsmanship and history." She smiled, a little wider this time, leaning forward slightly. "I do. I love things with meaning, with history. It tells a story. Don't you think homes should reflect who lives in them?" "Yes," I replied. "But a home is also a responsibility. You inherit it, care for it, and sometimes it demands sacrifices." Her eyes flickered ever so slightly, but she didn't respond immediately. I knew she was calculating, testing, measuring whether my words were a shield or a challenge. She sipped her tea and said softly, "Kevin talks about your generosity all the time. He's very lucky to have you in his life. I hope we can all get along as a family." "Yes," I said, matching her tone, "we can. Generosity is valuable, but so is integrity. Both are necessary to protect those we care about." She tilted her head, smiling, almost imperceptibly acknowledging the warning in my words, though she did not yet understand the depth of it. That night, as I cleared the teacups and prepared the living room for the evening, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had observed, I had measured, and I had remained calm. Jessica may have thought she was gathering intelligence, but in reality, she had revealed far more than she realized. Her intentions, her priorities, and her expectations. The stage was set. Kevin's happiness was important, but so was protecting him from manipulation. And as I straightened the antique vases on the mantel, I silently planned my next move, a gesture that would be subtle, precise, and unforgettable. Jessica's charm was a weapon, but I had my own arsenal, and soon she would see that generosity was earned, not assumed. The following week moved at a dizzying pace. Kevin and Jessica were like a whirlwind that swept through my life, and though he seemed caught up in the excitement of new responsibilities, I noticed more and more how Jessica controlled the tempo. Every text, every call, every brief conversation seemed carefully orchestrated to highlight need or expectation, as if subtly reminding me of the grandchild she was about to bring into the world. Kevin arrived home early one evening, a little pale from exhaustion. He leaned against the doorway, looking relieved, as though the day's chaos had passed. "Dad," he said softly, "Jessica and we were thinking about some things for the baby and housing." I raised my eyebrows. "Go on." Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "Well, she really likes Paradise Valley, and she mentioned how nice your neighborhood is. Safe, for kids, good schools." His voice faltered, and I could sense the weight of the unspoken expectation in the air. I nodded slowly, hiding my growing unease behind a neutral expression. "Yes, safety and education are important, but Paradise Valley comes with a price: high property taxes, long-term upkeep, HOA rules, and so forth." Kevin's gaze flicked downward. "I know, Dad, we're just exploring possibilities." The words were careful, rehearsed, familiar now. I could see the reflection of Jessica in this phrasing. Subtle, strategic, always positioning her needs as reasonable requests while leaving little room for denial. That evening, she arrived shortly after, impeccably dressed as always. Even casual clothing seemed like a statement of control, a carefully measured impression. She greeted me with a warm smile, offering a gentle hug. "Charles, thank you for taking the time to come by," she said, voice smooth, melodic, yet calculated. "I wanted to discuss a few things about the baby and our future home." I gestured to the living room chairs, and she seated herself with the poise of someone accustomed to command. Kevin hovered near the doorway, nervous energy radiating from him, waiting for her to speak first. Jessica began with a compliment, but I recognized it immediately as an opening tactic. Your home is beautiful. It's clear you've put a lot of care into every detail. I hope one day we can have a space like this for our child. Thank you, I said evenly. But a home like this isn't just about beauty. It's responsibility, maintenance, financial planning, upkeep. These are things that require thought and commitment. Her smile didn't waver, but I noticed the brief flicker in her eyes, a slight shift that revealed calculation. She wasn't just complimenting me. She was evaluating what I was willing to provide. And we understand that, she replied softly. We're not asking for anything extravagant, just a safe, comfortable place for our baby. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the weight of my words hang in the room. Safe and comfortable is one thing. Paradise Valley is another. You should consider everything: long-term costs, school districts, and other financial responsibilities. Raising a child requires more than space. It requires planning and foresight. Jessica tilted her head, her expression perfect, eyes glinting with intelligence. Of course, but having a supportive family makes it easier. Kevin talks about your generosity all the time, Charles. That's rare these days. I let a pause linger, drinking in the calm assertion she carried. Kevin shifted slightly, uncomfortable, his attention flicking from his fiancée to me, as though searching for guidance. I realized she was testing him as much as me, gauging where his loyalty lay, how much he would resist her subtle suggestions, and where I, as the father, might step in. Dinner that night was a carefully choreographed dance. Jessica moved through the conversation with a precision that was almost surgical, probing for both information and compliance. She asked about the business, casually inquiring about profits, store expansions, and investments. She complimented the home, then quickly noted how older properties required upkeep and constant attention. Each question seemed innocent, but each carried an undercurrent, measuring the family's ability to provide, the potential for generosity, the willingness to acquiesce. Kevin struggled, attempting to divert her focus, but Jessica's attention was unwavering. What about furniture? She asked, eyes scanning the dining room. Pieces like this are beautiful. Do you ever consider selling items and upgrading, or is maintaining originals important to you? I answered carefully, my voice even. Maintaining originals is important, especially in a home with history. But of course, upgrades are sometimes necessary. Her glance lingered a beat too long. I could feel her mind ticking, calculating potential opportunities, weighing what could be asked, what might be offered, and how it might benefit her. I saw the glimmer of her strategy in the way she subtly leaned toward Kevin, her hand brushing his, lightly touching his arm, a reminder of partnership, a reinforcement of suggestion. As the evening drew on, Jessica shifted the conversation toward practical matters, veiling requests as concerns. Kevin's current rental isn't ideal, she said lightly. Repairs are slow, and with the baby, well, it's just not sustainable. I'm sure you understand the importance of a stable home environment. Yes, I said calmly, though the caution in my voice was deliberate. A home is more than just a structure. It's financial responsibility, emotional stability, and long-term planning. Decisions made in haste can lead to difficulties later. She nodded, maintaining her perfect composure. We understand, but I do hope, as family, we can all support one another. It's a new chapter for all of us, after all. Kevin's posture remained tense. I could sense his relief when she finally looked at me and said, almost softly, Charles, I really appreciate your understanding. Kevin speaks so highly of you. I hope we can continue to have a strong relationship. I smiled, a small, measured smile, hiding the awareness simmering inside. Generosity is valuable, I said slowly, but it must be earned and it must be applied wisely. Family support isn't just about giving. It's about responsibility, mutual respect, and accountability. Her eyes flickered again, a brief shadow passing over her features, the first crack in the composed mask she wore so well. But she didn't retreat. Instead, she nodded and leaned back gracefully, as if acknowledging a challenge she didn't yet fully understand. When she left that night, Kevin practically sprinted after her, eager to discuss the next steps, leaving me alone with the quiet house. I moved slowly, clearing the cups and straightening the living room. Every gesture, Every careful movement was deliberate. I let the silence settle, a calm reflection after the storm of manipulation and subtle testing. I realized then that Jessica was skilled, far more skilled than Kevin realized. She was charming, clever, precise, and entirely focused on her objectives. But I had patience on my side. Observation, experience, and a measured response. I had learned long ago that the best way to disarm someone attempting to manipulate you was not confrontation. It was strategy. Quiet, deliberate, thoughtful. And I had a plan forming. The gift would come, but not in the form she expected. Generosity, I decided, would be paired with a lesson, not humiliation, not confrontation, but clarity. Jessica's assumptions about wealth, about entitlement, about immediate acquiescence, they would be addressed. Quietly, precisely, perfectly. That night, as I sat in Anne's old armchair, the faint hum of the city outside filling the quiet spaces of my home, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The game was beginning, and I was already 3 steps ahead. Jessica might think she was in control, but she hadn't yet realized that subtle observation and quiet wisdom often outweighed charm, beauty, and cunning. The stage was set, and soon she would learn that generosity was a privilege, not an obligation, and that not every request. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of my study, spilling across the polished oak floors and the neatly stacked fabric samples from the showroom. The previous week had been exhausting. Kevin and Jessica had been circulating through my life like a whirlwind, Jessica's subtle manipulations carefully masked behind charm and politeness. And yet, I had observed, calculated, and most importantly, planned. Today was the day for a small, deliberate gesture, a reminder of boundaries and discernment. I had spent the night thinking about how best to deliver it. It needed to be firm without being cruel, subtle yet unmistakably precise. Jessica's charm and cleverness required finesse. She needed to understand the lesson without feeling humiliated. Kevin called mid-morning, his voice light, almost too carefree. "Dad, Jessica was hoping you could drop by after lunch. She's curious about some interior design ideas for the nursery, and well, she thought you might have advice." I nodded silently. "I'll be there around 2." As I prepared, I thought about Anne's china cabinet, the delicate porcelain plates, the soft hum of the house. Every piece in this home had meaning, and every gesture I made today would carry the weight of intention. I selected a small box from the cabinet, wrapping it neatly in soft tissue paper. Not expensive, not flashy, just thoughtful, symbolic. It wasn't money, it wasn't material wealth, it was a message. By 2:00 p.m., I was at Kevin and Jessica's apartment. Jessica opened the door immediately, her designer heels clicking lightly against the tile. Her smile was bright, calculated. "Charles, you came! I'm so glad!" She stepped aside, gesturing me in, her eyes scanning the room with the practiced precision I had come to expect. "Thank you for inviting me," I said evenly. "I wanted to see the nursery plans you mentioned." Kevin hovered behind her, nervous energy practically vibrating from him. "Jess thought you could help with colors, maybe placement of furniture." I nodded politely, observing Jessica's every movement. She pulled out a set of sketches, a digital tablet showing layout options. "I thought some of your furniture pieces might inspire the room," she said, her tone light but carrying that subtle undertone of expectation I had come to recognize. I studied the sketches carefully, offering thoughtful suggestions. "This crib would work best near the window for natural light," I said, pointing. "But you'll want to avoid direct sunlight in the afternoons. The dresser could be here, leaving enough space for movement." Jessica nodded, jotting notes, eyes flicking to me occasionally. "You have such a good eye." Kevin says the same. I smiled, letting the compliment linger. Observation was a two-way street, and I allowed her to believe she was in control. After reviewing the room, I set the small gift box on the coffee table. Jessica glanced at it curiously, leaning forward to pick it up. "Oh, Charles, what's this?" I held her gaze, calm and deliberate. "A small token," I said, letting my voice convey quiet authority, "to celebrate your new chapter." She untied the ribbon with delicate fingers, lifting the lid carefully. Inside was a simple, handcrafted keychain. On it was engraved a single phrase: Generosity is earned, not assumed. Her eyes widened, flickering between the object in her hand and my calm expression. Oh, I thought. Her voice trailed off, unsteady for the first time. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence fill the room. Jessica, charm is not a currency, and admiration is not a guarantee of support. You've spent time evaluating, appraising, and calculating expectations. This is a reminder that generosity comes with discernment and respect. It isn't automatic. It is an ode. Kevin shifted uncomfortably, his hand brushing against hers. Jess, Dad's right. Maybe. Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line and I could see her recalibrating. She had expected a financial gesture, perhaps a promise of a house or assistance. Instead, she had received a lesson, delivered gently but firmly. She had been so focused on outcomes that she hadn't anticipated boundaries. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a carefully measured tone, she said, I understand. Thank you, Charles. Truly. I nodded, allowing the room to relax slightly. The lesson had been delivered, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with calm precision. The subtle shift in the atmosphere was unmistakable. Jessica's assumptions had been challenged, and she had reacted with poise. But internally, I knew the message was clear. She would think twice before testing generosity again. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. Kevin showed me around the apartment, pointing out the improvements they had made, while Jessica remained polite, attentive, but noticeably less assertive. I offered advice on baby-proofing furniture and selecting non-toxic paints, each suggestion deliberate and measured. Before leaving, I handed the keychain back to Jessica with a gentle smile. Keep it close, I said. It's easy to forget lessons when things seem simple. Life has a way of reminding us. She accepted it, her posture perfect, her smile slightly tighter than before. I will, she said. I appreciate it, Charles. Outside, Kevin walked me to the car. Dad, that was amazing. I didn't know how to handle her, he admitted, exhaling heavily. I patted his shoulder. Kevin, charm and strategy can be impressive, but generosity and respect are earned. You'll see the difference as time goes on. Remember, it's not about controlling people. It's about protecting those we love and setting clear boundaries. As I drove home, the quiet streets of Scottsdale reflected. In my windshield, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The gift had been subtle, precise, and effective. Jessica's expectations had been challenged without confrontation, and I had maintained my composure throughout. Back at home, I carefully placed Anne's china back in the cabinet, running my fingers over the delicate gold rim, thinking about the lessons of patience, observation, and quiet authority. Jessica may have believed she was navigating a complex web of influence, but she hadn't realized she was walking into one as well. I allowed the satisfaction of strategy to settle in, knowing that the next steps would be guided not by impulse, but by careful planning. Kevin's happiness mattered, but it could not come at the cost of manipulation. And Jessica's subtle challenge had been answered, not with anger, but with quiet, precise justice. By evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the house was calm again. I made tea, savoring the warmth and silence, reflecting on the events of the past days. I had seen Jessica's ambitions clearly, and now she had seen mine. The balance of power was understood, and somewhere in the distance, I knew the next act of this quiet game would unfold. But for now, I had set the precedent. Boundaries, respect, and thoughtful generosity. All delivered with calm, unshakable authority. The keychain rested on the counter beside my chair, a small symbol of quiet victory, a subtle reminder that not all expectations are met, and that the true measure of generosity lies in discernment. Jessica had learned her first lesson, and I was ready for the next. The house was quiet that evening. The sunlight, waning behind the distant Scottsdale mountains, cast long shadows across the polished floors. I sat in Anne's armchair, the familiar leather cool against my palms, and allowed myself a moment of reflection. The past week had been intense. Kevin and Jessica, their whirlwind arrival, Jessica's probing questions, and finally the delivery of a subtle but precise lesson in boundaries and discernment. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the warmth settle, and thought about the events of the last few days. Jessica had been charming, clever, and calculating. There was no doubt about that. She had measured my reactions, subtly tested generosity, engaged my willingness to accommodate, and yet she had underestimated me. She hadn't realized that years of observation, experience, and quiet patience had prepared me for exactly this type of situation. The small keychain resting on the coffee table beside me served as a reminder. Generosity is earned, not assumed. A simple phrase, yet it carried the weight of experience, wisdom, and careful strategy. Jessica had received the message, though politely veiled in her composed exterior. I knew she had felt the subtle sting of expectation unmet, a lesson delivered not with confrontation, but with calm, deliberate authority. That night, Kevin called from his apartment. His voice was soft, almost tentative. "Dad, I wanted to thank you for today, for everything. I don't know what I would have done without your guidance." I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. "Kevin, your happiness matters, but it's important to understand how to protect it. Generosity, support, love, they all matter, but they come with discernment. Remember, not every expectation is fair, and not every request deserves immediate compliance." He laughed nervously. I, I think Jessica understands that now." "I hope she does," I replied carefully. "But remember, this isn't just about her learning lessons. It's about knowing your own limits, your values, and your priorities. Your family will respect that, and so will those who matter." As I hung up the phone, I reflected on Kevin's journey. He had stumbled through failed relationships and uncertain decisions in his 20s. Now at 30, he was about to become a father. The stakes were high, and I wanted him to understand that family meant more than appearances, more than wealth or status. It meant integrity, mutual respect, and responsibility. The next morning, I received a text from Jessica. It was short, almost clinical in its phrasing. "Thank you for the gift. It was thoughtful. I understand your point." I read it twice, savoring the precision of her acknowledgement. No overreaction, no attempt to mask embarrassment, just the recognition of a boundary crossed and a lesson delivered. Over the next week, Kevin and Jessica continued preparing for the baby. Jessica's usual probing questions became more measured, her strategic evaluations softened by the awareness that generosity had its conditions. Kevin, for the first time, seemed more confident, less caught in the whirlwind of expectations, and more focused on what mattered for his new family. One evening, Kevin and I took a walk around the neighborhood. The sky was painted in streaks of gold and rose, and the quiet streets felt calm, almost serene. "Dad," Kevin said, hesitating, "I wanted to ask about Jessica, about how you handled everything. You didn't confront her exactly, but she understood." I nodded slowly. "Sometimes, Kevin, the most effective lessons aren't delivered with force. They're delivered with patience, observation, and quiet authority. People often reveal their intentions through actions and words. The key is to recognize them, respond thoughtfully, and maintain control without losing composure." Kevin glanced down, thoughtful. "I've never seen her like that. Calm, controlled. I think, I think she respected it." "I hope so," I said. "But the lesson isn't just for her. It's for you as well. Boundaries, discernment, integrity. These are the pillars that will guide you through life, marriage, and fatherhood." Later that evening, Jessica arrived at our home for a casual dinner. The atmosphere was different now, lighter, less charged, more respectful. She complimented the home sincerely, asked questions about the baby's room with genuine interest, and offered to help Kevin with preparations, her focus shifting from evaluation to participation. I watched her closely, noting the subtle changes, the tension, the quiet probing, the strategic calculations. They were still there, but softened. She was learning the balance between expectation and reality, ambition and respect. And Kevin, for the first time, seemed fully present, able to navigate both charm and subtle strategy without losing his own footing. Dinner concluded smoothly. I poured a modest glass of wine for each of us, keeping the conversation light yet meaningful. Topics shifted from business to family traditions, from furniture design to nursery plans. Laughter filled the room, gentle and genuine. Before leaving, Jessica approached me with a small, sincere smile. Charles, thank you for your guidance, for the gift, for everything. I see now that generosity has limits, and I appreciate that you showed me. I will keep it in mind. I nodded, allowing a quiet satisfaction to settle. Thank you, Jessica. That acknowledgement means more than any gift could. Respect and understanding are the foundations of any family, and I trust that both Kevin and you will build something meaningful for your child. Later, after they left, I sat in the quiet of my home, Anne's china reflecting the soft light from the dining room. The events of the past weeks had reminded me of many lessons, that generosity is powerful but must be measured, that patience and observation often speak louder than confrontation, and that boundaries, when set with clarity and calm, command respect. I thought about Kevin, about his growth, about the responsibilities he would soon inherit as a father and husband. I felt a quiet pride tempered with caution, knowing that the lessons of generosity, discernment, and integrity were now etched not only in Jessica's awareness, but in his as well. In the days that followed, life settled into a rhythm. Jessica and Kevin prepared for the baby, the dynamics shifting subtly yet significantly. Jessica's charm remained, but now it was tempered by respect, a recognition that not every expectation would be met automatically. Kevin's confidence grew, his focus on family and responsibility sharpened, and I, Charles, could finally allow a quiet exhale, knowing the lesson had been delivered precisely, firmly, and without malice. The gift, the small, deliberate keychain, had conveyed a message far more powerful than money ever could. It had delivered clarity, boundaries, and the understanding that generosity is earned, not assumed. Sitting in the evening light, I reflected on the delicate balance of family, love, and authority. The past weeks had tested patience, observation, and strategy. The outcome was subtle, yet profoundly satisfying. Generosity had been protected, integrity maintained, and respect established. And in that quiet victory, I found reassurance that even in a world filled with charm and cleverness, experience, wisdom, and calm resolve could guide the family through challenges, lessons, and new beginnings. Charles leaned back in the armchair, taking a deep breath. The game had not only ended with subtle victory, but it had set the foundation for the future, a future where Kevin and Jessica could learn to navigate life, ambition, and love with clarity, respect, and discernment. The house was quiet once more, but the lessons lingered in every corner, in the polished floors, the carefully arranged furniture, and the gleaming china. Generosity, patience, and quiet authority had prevailed, and the family would be stronger for it. The keychain rested on the counter, a small, unassuming symbol of wisdom. And as I finally allowed myself to relax, I smiled, knowing that in the delicate balance of family, love, and subtle strategy, the true measure of character had been revealed and respected.